That it. Okay, I'll call to order this legislative committee meeting for September 8, 2023. The order, President Arhoy.
Stapleton, Nordic.
And staff to be identified. Welcome, everybody. We are on legislative updates. Justin Martin.
Awesome. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff. Good to see everybody. Happy Friday. Real brief today. I'll just go over the legislative calendar real quick so everybody's aware of it. We've got legislative days coming up at the end of September.
What are the dates?
27, 28, and 29. Then we have legislative days again in November, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th. We have a couple deadline legislative council requests is November 9th. We will have another revenue forecast around November 15th, actually on November 15th. Then the return for those drafts happens January 8th, so that second Monday of January. And then there's another round of legislative days. So that kind of maps out the quarter. Those legislative days will be the 10th, the 11th, and 12th. Our wonderful short session begins February 5th. We get another revenue forecast on the 7th. Set the tone for that little short sprint of 35 days. And then session ends on the 10th of March. And then, of course, filing day is March 12th. So we see how political the short session can really be. And we should expect some of that going in. That being said, it's a good segue to talk a little bit about our interim work. As Dan mentioned earlier, interim is one of the best parts of being a lobbyist, right? Everything's kind of toned down until Labor Day. Now we're post Labor Day, everybody's back to school and everybody's kind of back to work. So what's that mean? That means we'll be out and about, me being my firm, we'll be doing all the campaign events, we'll be doing a lot of politicking, and I'm really looking forward to that since we're out kind of outside of the pandemic to get back into our normal routines, meeting with legislators in their districts, actually talking things through about our plans and wants and needs. So I'm pretty excited about that. Just a quick report, Mr. Mayor. I met with Senator Patterson multiple times on the phone, just talking about funding again for our sheltering centers and how we're going to approach that. I know you've been talking with that office as well as the rest of our delegation. I had a nice meeting with the Speaker Rayfield. We talked about some things that we'll continue to talk about today. Multiple meetings on the phone with Senator Wagner as the Senate Democratic Caucus tries to kind of get moving towards the session. I met with Representative Evans after you met with him, Mr. Mayor, last week, and then finally met with the governor's office. And I've done that multiple times, both with my policy person in there and their attorney in talking about where we're going next session and what we really need out of this short session. So we've been having those conversations. I'll continue to update council and the mayor and all our staff on what's going on as I start to do, again, what most lobbyists do, and that's really get your work done in the interim. So we've got those opportunities coming up around campaign events and around just doing meetings with those folks and making sure to let them know our priorities, which everybody's going to hear about here in a little bit. So that's your state update. Any questions?
All right, thank you.
Yep.
We'll go on to Mark and Terry from Summit Strategies for the federal perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark Dedrick, Summit Strategies. This month, the month of August, for session purposes, we're basically still in August here in DC. The House is still in the midst of their 6-week August recess. The Senate did come back into session this week, so it's been a pretty slow month in terms of actions actually taking place here in DC. It has led to a lot of staff and members being back in the state and in the districts, which you all have had Congresswoman Salinas and some of her staff touring various city things over the last few weeks here. Our main work that we've been doing here recently has been getting ready and preparing and scheduling for the mayor's trip to Washington, D.C. next week, which we're looking forward to. Our whole schedule is fleshed out since our conversation last night, so we'll make sure, Courtney, that you've got the most up-to-date schedule here shortly with everything on it, and we're just ready to move on that and to get around and talk with the delegation with the mayor while he's back here. And that's the main thing we have had going on here on the federal side.
Okay, questions for federal folks?
What are our legislative priorities at the federal level? What are you guys hoping to share with them?
We are gonna, I think that's coming up here on the next,
Okay,
yeah.
Great.
We'll go through all that.
I'll block them.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And so now we are on legislative priorities. So Courtney.
Thank you. So my hope today is that we can work through the legislative policy statements, which is what we use to guide our work during the session at the state level. And then there's a second attachment to your packet that lists out some of the federal project priorities and the state project priorities that we were hoping to get sort of consensus about, and then we can refer that to council as a recommendation from this committee. So those are our goals today. The legislative policy statements, if I could, I'll just direct to a couple of changes. It looks like what we sent out was clean, and so it looks ready, but there were a couple things that I just wanted to reflect on so that you were aware. We incorporated your input from last time. On the third page, there's a reference to municipal tax exempt bonding. That's new. There is a reference just below about diversifying the transportation funding. So to guide you, it's mid-page. Modification of tax.
And it's actually clear at the top. And your
Let me go
first
with
one
it.
is at the bottom of the second page, and the second
I
one
will
references
use
the top of
references that are appropriate. Yes, municipal tax exempt bonding is at the very bottom, and you don't even have page numbers.
No.
Ah, I do. So that would be on the second page, and then at the very top, as you mentioned, diversification of the transportation funding that we currently have available to us so that we can, as people are moving to higher mileage vehicles and as people are buying more EVs, that gas tax structure isn't working any longer to fund the needs that we have for roads and streets and sidewalks. And so we're looking to, we're joining with ODOT really in that appeal for a change to the transportation fund for operations and maintenance. So that's new.
And that really came out of a conversation that we had with our others a few weeks ago.
And then there is a reference to public safety staffing capacity. It's on the next page. Public safety is the header, and at the very bottom, you'll see two things. Public safety staffing capacity and more capacity for data informed decision making. And those are going to be new contributions based on conversations that we've been having all around the community and in the city. So those are going to be two news ads, and then on the just below the next page, homelessness and affordable housing. You'll see more language around affordable housing to oppose legislation that hinders increasing our supply of affordable housing by adding costs to planning, acquisition, rehab, and development and construction of affordable housing projects. And that could be where the city's involved. There's a fully prevailing wage is offered. It's things like that. We're just looking for ways to make more affordable housing in our community and make it less cost prohibitive for developers to engage.
I would just suggest that this sentence is a little bit confusing. It kind of uses a couple of, like a double negative in there, like oppose legislation that hinders increasing. It's just kind of like, yeah, I kind of have to mind map, like, what are we saying in this, you know what I mean?
Okay.
I'm hoping there's a way we could say it a little bit more clearly.
Certainly can.
That'd be great.
We'll fix it.
Thank you.
Can I have a thought?
Yes, please.
When we were touring Barren Island, we were talking about I want to say this right. The fact that we haven't really beefed up our security out there or haven't felt the need to, and I know that at the state level, there's been some conversations about domestic terrorism and finding ways to ensure the safety of key infrastructure like drinking water. And I wonder if there's any space within the realm of talking to folks about getting some funding to help us make that site a little bit more secure. It is it's open. I don't even think we have a date.
For those who haven't been there recently,
Yeah.
we have new neighbors moving in. There's a whole development happening right next door. So it's gonna increase the, like, just general foot traffic in the area, so that, I think that's
Yeah.
is something that we heard about, I heard about on my recent tour out there for sure.
And just to date, we've really just relied on the remoteness of it and the fact that it is on an island when it's easy to get to, but, so I'm just wondering if there's space for that in this conversation.
There would be space for, I think that's more of a project priority and less of a policy. piece,
Sounds
but certainly, I can hear Mark and Terry offering ideas for funding. I can hear it, it's happening, even though you're on mute. So I feel confident that that's something that we can better scope and better understand and certainly put on a list for future funding.
Thank you.
So to be clear, Courtney, all the policy statements you've just reviewed, this is at the state level, because I see right after that in our packet is a separate discussion for federal. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
This
so make
is-
sure I was tracking.
We're adjusting on the fly to having more federal capacity. So
Which is great.
some of our practices are still a little state centric and shortly, but we can certainly get better all the time.
That's to be expected.
So I was gonna transition if it's okay. Counselor Stapleton, at the very beginning, there's water infrastructure priorities for federal funding of that list that Counselor Nordic was just noticing. That would be the perfect place for us to add some kind of security for drinking water in our facilities. I have no idea what the ask would be, so we can certainly get more detail.
Mark and Brian are the ones who talked to me about it, so I know they're ready to, I'm sure, add some language.
Good. So you might see it less precise when it would, if this is recommended to council, it may be less precise right now, but we would continue to refine. So back to the policy statements, are there any other questions or suggestions for ads?
I definitely have some comments / questions under opportunity zones. Great. I just wanted to point out I was at the Holman Hotel this morning and someone mentioned that property is the beneficiary of a downtown opportunity zone. Because they had to, originally Marion Auto, does anyone remember when Marion Auto was there? They had leaded gas buried underground. And so the environmental cleanup for that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that opportunity zone helped make that project pencil. And now we have the Holman Hotel there. And the general manager was telling me that they anticipate, not only have they already created 60 new jobs, but they anticipate $4 million in ancillary income, not to them, but to the entire downtown region for all the people who are now going to be staying at that hotel. And I know council supported, we all voted in favor of giving some funds to help the Holman Hotel become a reality. So it was just so great to see this come full circle. And I think that to me is a testimonial of the power of opportunity zones. So that's really more of a comment. I know that in the past, we have, especially our mayor, have made valiant efforts to try and get some, is it on here? I'm trying to think if it's on here or not. Yes, right. Is there any possibility of us going back to get some support from all the state-owned properties for our revenue? Maybe not in the short session. I don't know. I'm just curious.
It may not be through legislation, it may be through a different vehicle that we would pursue payment in lieu of taxes. And that is listed, sorry again for all the paper and the
No worries.
confusing way we think about these things, but that is listed in the state priorities for a policy area. Payment in lieu of taxes, sorry. It is in your packet, it would be on the second page of that brainstorming federal agenda.
Okay, yeah, I was just glancing at it.
You not seeing it?
Yeah.
It's at the very bottom,
Oh,
it's so small. It means so much, but it.
Yeah, okay, there I
is
see it.
small.
But to answer your question directly, Councilor, yes, we are absolutely still pursuing that.
Right.
The meetings that Justin referenced that I had last week with our local legislators was specifically on that topic, so continuing to.
And my meeting with the speaker was discussing this just that.
Is there anything you can speak to in terms of their receptiveness to this idea?
I mean, at this stage, I mean, I think people understand the need. It's just how does it all fit within a statewide picture, or how does it fit with,
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, everybody's receptive.
Yeah.
So they understand that. It's just how do you package that statewide?
Right.
Because there's other municipalities with a lot of
Mhm.
property off the roll.
Justin, how is that conversation also happening as far as just general tax reform, as far as measures 5 and 50? Is that all happening at the same time in the same conversation, or are those two separate conversations?
Those are
I'd say
separate,
they're running parallel with each other.
Yeah.
It's-
but definitely separate.
Definitely.
Because we have more of a local issue with payment of load taxes, the property tax reform is obviously a statewide issue, totally different ballgame, but those conversations are happening. In fact, Senator Patterson is taking up kind of taking the lead on bringing some folks together to have a conversation about that really soon. So, yeah, so parallel tracks.
I'm just asking because in the community, there's I think a really non-informed view that we're not pursuing these two options and haven't been. And I see this on here. I feel like this property tax reform has probably been on this list for a while. And I was just wondering, do we,
And the League of Oregon Cities has been really active in that conversation. I feel like that's for decades. Do you have a sense, Josh, about when that, did it start in 1993?
Probably within a couple of years after it passed. It was very clear that there were unanticipated impacts, right after it happened. And they've been working since the 320.
And I was on a panel discussion at the Oregon Mayors Association a couple of weeks ago on this very topic. So yeah, it's an active conversation statewide for sure. But it's as you know, it's a big lift.
it is, thank you.
So with the changes to the affordable housing narrative that makes it more clean, how are you all feeling about the readiness to provide this to the council?
I just noticed there's a phrase in here that I don't remember before, and it's probably been here before, and I just either didn't notice it or wasn't as comfortable with it. But it's over on human resources under management rights and collective bargaining.
Mhm.
And the initial line is the one that's concerning opposed legislation that broadens the scope of bargaining unit membership. I'm wondering if that's really what we're intending to say.
This is a reflection of an evolving thinking. I think this may have been handed to me 5 or 6 years ago. So in its form, it's just added to and deleted to as we need. So
Gotcha.
if you wish to make any changes to it,
Yeah.
it's your purview.
I think in the city context, this makes sense because everybody who's non-management is in the union, is subject to being in the union, and we totally support that.
Mhm,
But when you look at that statement outside of a city context,
mhm.
it may not make as much sense. So I feel like we should modify that language.
Would you be comfortable retaining the mandate or guarantees staffing levels? For
Yeah.
individuals?
Yeah. I just don't want to look like we're saying we don't want people in unions, because I don't think that's the council's position at all. Certainly not my personal position. But within the city framework, I don't want managers being in the union, that kind of, that's what I'm more, I think it's probably what the intent of this is. So I just want to make sure we're precise in that language.
Maybe it would be useful too to back up for a second and just talk about what the purpose of this is. So the policy statement's really, and it's sort of maybe less valuable than it once was. In last session, what we saw a lot of was the combined purpose legislation that it wasn't like one issue, one piece of legislation. So this may be outdated, even this practice.
Yeah.
But typically we use these policy statements as sort of any bill that comes up that has one thing in it like this, we can either oppose or support, because we've had council involvement and engagement on the principles, these policy statements. The bills that I don't recall ever seeing a single issue union related bill, but if there was something like anything that came up, if it's not shown here, We would bring it to the committee and we would talk about it, and then the council would agree or disagree with the recommendation of the committee.
Understood.
So most everything comes through here anyway, as part of our normal course of action. This just gives us a shortcut.
Totally understand that. I'm just concerned about having this language being a part of our official statement. I would
Yeah.
propose that we eliminate, first starting at the word broadens
Mhm.
and ending at the word membership, and just eliminate, broadens the
Yes.
scope of bargaining unit membership and leave everything else.
I've already done so on my little cheat sheet.
Does that work for
Yeah.
counselors?
Thank you. Yes.
So eliminate starting at broadens, go all the way to unit membership, but
Mhm.
leave everything else.
Right, so it would now read oppose legislation that mandates or guarantees staffing or scheduling.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Vanessa is still contemplating.
I don't know. I mean, I don't like the first two sentences at all, personally. That's my personal position on those. Do I support efforts to provide services in a cost-effective manner? Certainly, but I don't support the first two sentences.
This is your policy direction and your guidance.
Yep.
I've made my position.
Virginia, what's your thought?
I understand the issue with the guaranteeing of staffing and scheduling limits. I think I understand the administrative, what we're trying to struggle with there. So I think I would be okay with the original edits to the first sentence. And I am not an expert in unions or midterm bargaining and all of that providing, so I don't feel qualified to make a statement on the next sentence. How's that?
Fair.
Yeah.
Is this coming to us on Monday?
No.
No, Monday's a work session.
You've, as a committee, the direction was that we wanted to not walk these
Yeah.
things onto the agenda.
So when is this
It would be the
contemplated?
second, meeting in September.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time.
And you can also choose not to take action today.
Right, okay. Why don't we do that, and maybe we can have a conversation and find some language that we're all. So
I'd like
let's,
to hear from Trevor too.
yeah, let's table that one for now, and let's circle back to
Yeah, we do have two members, not referenced, right?
One.
one and an alternate.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's table this one for now, and we'll come back.
We'll come back to it. We can do that at your next meeting, which we'll talk about later.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
So is there energy and enthusiasm to look at the?
Yeah.
There is both.
And so we had one conversation about these priorities with Todd Scott together. And your feedback was to modify it so it was more clear which things were heading to the state for priority funding opportunities and which things might be headed to a federal level. And so we've tried to separate. In some cases, it's challenging, but you can see an attempt. Nothing really has changed, I don't think, about these lists of projects or policy priorities. There may be a couple more words in a couple places just to help us make more sense of things. And then just so you're clear, when we are advocating for a specific project or a specific policy priority, we do make little white paper sort of briefing papers so that we are all speaking about the issue in the same way. And so that it's a leave behind for some of those conversations. Those things get sort of more refined and prettier as as we proceed and as interest develops in any of those funding opportunities. So for right now, while payment in lieu of taxes is so short, we do have a lot of background information. We just don't have it polished up.
Okay, so these are the so just to be clear, these are state and federal projects.
So on the first page, you see more things that are probably better suited to a federal.
Right.
And the thing that you don't see is security at drinking water facility.
Right.
And then on the back page, you see a list of things that we've talked about from a federal perspective that would benefit the city should there be some changes made.
I have a question on Fairgrounds area park property acquisition. What's that?
Where are you?
right in the middle of the page. Right, under parks and natural resource, natural spaces. But almost exactly in the middle.
Not with you yet. Where are you?
Right here.
On the second one.
On the possible funding priorities for state and federal agenda, halfway down the page.
Oh, okay, on the last page.
Yeah.
Second to last.
Right,
Ah.
on the other side of that, so.
Where is it? I'm still
Right.
hard to find it.
So
Yeah, thank you. Thank
it
you.
starts, the page is titled possible funding priorities
Yeah.
for state and federal. So these are things that are less developed. They're sort of things that are germinating and.
Understood, I just want to know what we're talking about.
That one, to me, the PN reference makes it seem like it's a capital project in our CIP.
Yeah.
Rob?
I had a feeling Rob had all the answers to my question.
The issue we're attempting to address here is an area of high need, an area of the city that's unserved by neighborhood park. And it's for now part of NOLA and NEN. So it's the area directly to the east and south of the fairgrounds.
Okay,
It's right there on the top corner.
so you're talking about the. Are we talking
That
about?
general community.
Oh, just a general.
Just a general area. We identified a site that approximately 2 years ago, the Citizens Budget Committee added a project in the CIP that we would go out and attempt to acquire any property. And then this year's budget was partly funded, additional funding, which is slated for next year. And so we are in the process of looking for sites to acquire. And this would be federal funds to leverage the city's funds.
Okay, there is a vacant lot at Sunnyview, and I think it's Childs or maybe Lansing, but there's a vacant lot, and the neighborhood association has pushed me in the past to acquire that for a park. And Eunice is nodding her head like she knows exactly what you're talking about. It would be a great little park. It's not huge, but it'd be a great little park for that neighborhood right on Sunnyview over like near Lansing. And then it's just been sitting there and it just has blackberry bushes and it would be amazing in that area.
So that area needs more parks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
You know, while we're on the subject of the fairgrounds, I mean, every year I go to the fair and I love it. And I look at all this vast real estate that just sits vacant. 370 days out of the year. And I sure wish we could acquire at least part of it and put it multifamily housing.
I would love to have the property at least south of Sunnyview, if nothing else, just that whole south of Sunnyview area that just like you said, it sits vacant. The challenge with it, as I was when I talked about this idea, is that it's the site of a camas lily grow, a significant camas lily.
Mhm.
And so.
But anywhere on that
I know,
ginormous,
yeah,
it's in all directions.
I know,
There's nowhere, they wouldn't even miss it.
I know.
We should just break ground, they won't even know, it'll be fine.
We did the Ferris wheel this time, and of course, me and Isaac were at the top, like, oh, we could put housing over there, or we could, you know what I mean? But yes, is there any conversation? I know that Highland Neighborhood Association sent in a letter about trying to get funding to rehabilitate some of our structures within the state fairgrounds. Is there any conversations?
That's not a city issue.
At Oregon Fair Council, it governs the property, so, and I don't know.
Keith is a member and I'm supposed to be.
You are. Because
You don't seem excited about that.
There's like a 25-page application. They're like, you have to be on the board. We want you're on the board. And then they're like, fill out the application. I'm like, it's like 25 pages.
Just have
What's in your
different
view of
documents
DEI?
and staff for that. I'm sorry, Dan, but
I'm happy with that.
Anywho,
sorry, we digress.
I do have a question for federal priorities. I don't see affordable housing funding as listed as a federal priority. Is that something we could add there? That's what my constituents, if they're not asking me about homelessness, they're asking me about affordable housing over and over again. Is there anything we should be doing at the federal level to explore that?
What do you think, Mark?
I think that's easy enough.
Terry?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely it's something that we can and should put on there. I think it is a lot of the stuff in order to help with affordable housing broadly are things that are kind of issues for all cities and kind of public governments nationally. So it's kind of a thing to put on there as this is a priority for the city of Salem and flag it with our delegation. but assume kind of that the Conference of Mayors and the National League of Cities are going to be kind of the lead, and we're going to kind of be a voice in the chorus, kind of on that, singing from the same hymnal as all of your other kind of similar cities around the country. Our delegation is largely very favorable towards those policy changes and those and all of those issues. So I think that's a way that we can advocate on behalf and put that in there. And then another thing that I think we can do, and that I think we'll be looking at as we look towards specific project funding for next year, is looking at individual projects and seeing if there's something that makes sense that is both a priority for the city on a project specific basis, that also fits in with the priorities for our congressional delegation and for the federal agencies when it comes to either congressionally directed spending or towards federal grant funding.
Great. It makes sense to go with the tide and the mayors or cities associations you mentioned. I mean, we, as part of that $300 million bond, Chris, I think it was your idea to have, if we're gonna do library branches, to incorporate housing as part of that. So I mean, I don't know if that would be a potential project that the delegation would be supportive of, but that comes to mind as something that might benefit from a little federal support. I mean, I'm sure we could, if you ask every counselor in the room, we could all come up with, just like we did now, like, hey, that'd be a great spot, that'd be a great spot, that'd be a great spot. But that's, my constituents are clamoring for that over and over again. And it's readily apparent that that's a huge challenge. And we're now one of the top 25 cities in Oregon that face a lot of rent burdened renters, where they're spending half of their income each month. It's over 25% of Salem renters spend half of their monthly take home just to stay indoors. And I know there are 24 other cities in Oregon who are at that level, if not higher. So yeah, I'm sure we're one of many who are facing that challenge. But yeah, if there's something we can do to advocate for specific projects here, I'm all in favor.
And when it comes to not even just the specific project side, but just kind of the larger national problem when it comes to housing, homelessness, things of that issue too. One of the things that I think is most useful in my experience is, again, given that our delegation is right there with you, I think, and what they want to help solve this problem, is to just make sure we're providing them with Salem's story when it comes to these issues, and are making sure they kind of have the material and the information and the arguments that they need in order to help within Congress at large, by kind of taking the local information from you all to actually be able to apply it to the national argument.
And we do have materials prepared for
Yep.
from the December visit, and it's just absent from here, but we did have it. I thought it looked fairly decent. It was a great flyer that really explained the investments that we have been making, and then where we really need more help. And we took a section of that for the visit that will be going in September. Plus, we have the rental assistance demonstration program fix that we need, which we've spoken about here before. And so it's just absent from here, but certainly because we just assumed, of course, then we should make it reflective. Yes.
Could we answer Councilor Nordick's question directly in terms of which things we're gonna be advocating specifically for next week in Washington? I don't
Yes.
see it where
I know.
it's not on like a specific list. So could we just answer that question directly?
Yes, we can.
I don't have a list in front of me.
So we have a flyer on sheltering support that we need, which I just referenced. We have a flyer on the USCIS office location, same. We have a flyer on support for sheltering programs and behavioral health supports. And then there's a ballistic,
Neither.
yeah, you can say whatever you want about that. Shell casing thing. Data tracking, national data tracking, shell casing. And then there is also a piece on the Safe Streets funding, which we have an active application for and have a whole queue of things that are ready for additional funding.
So that's safer crossings and 20th and
Currently, Vision Zero
Vision Zero.
planning and 20th planning are is the active application. And then we have things in the queue that are ready, which include the Maple Winter Bikeway, generally safer crossings, because the need far exceeds our ability to fund.
Sure.
And then the
Yes.
25th Street multi-use path, which connects really well to the complete street at McGilchrist and the existing investments at what was Henningsen Cold Storage, Airport, Madrona, that section. So We have three things that are in the queue ready, but we have the Vision Zero and the 20s Lane program available for grant funding. We're hoping that we hear good news about. And then there is something that I'm not remembering.
While you're trying to remember that, I mean, to me, what I feel is an omission is we're not telling the story of the need for housing. And Shaw does a phenomenal job putting together, they can put together success stories. Our family self-sufficiency program is very successful at helping families build success, empowers them. They get buy-in at the end of the 5 years. They have enough funds to be placed in permanent housing.
The one that,
You
that's
know,
probably never
things
for
like
one, the one she forgot was the rental assistance.
Demonstration. project.
The route,
Okay.
that is on the list.
Okay, great.
There's
Wonderful.
also, the other one I forgot was the greater flexibility in CDBG funding.
Yes.
That we enjoyed and our community enjoyed the benefit of
Uh-huh.
during COVID. And so we're seeking to retain some of that
So,
flexibility.
yeah, so we have like specific goals in mind, specific grant applications,
Sure.
specific changes like to the CDBG and the RAD. Otherwise, we're not doing any like just general lobbying. It's very targeted on specific issues. So some of the meetings are with like ODOT or not, USDOT, with our delegation and COPS and HUD. So it's very, very targeted on that specific list.
Okay, I understand, yeah. Applying for a
Sorry, are
specific.
you meeting with the rail? Just,
No, we don't have a rail project specific on our list. We might get into the Front Street conversation with our senators, or with Rep Salinas. We're not sure. That's like on a second tier, depending on time, because
yeah,
we have a limited time with them,
so
so.
that's like a Hail Mary,
Right,
so,
right.
yeah.
It's in the, like, the secondary queue, I would call it.
Just because of our last incident this last week where we had a train stop for hours, right? When somebody was,
It was a suicide.
yes, but then, you know, the blockage because the train was so long.
Yeah.
That whole conversation
Yeah.
about extra long trains and about.
Yeah.
Completely shutting down our city when something bad happens.
So clearly, the things that are going to be discussed next week should be on this list.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I thought we were gonna get, and I'm like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
the list isn't
Should
here.
be.
They should be, we will make sure that gets to everybody in writing, so they have a clear. And we'll get the white papers out to you all too.
Question, in the future, could we get, and I don't know if this is available to us, but I know that we have this list of grants that are submitted, but do we have an estimate on when we will hear back about those? And could we get that added to our agenda just for our information?
Yes, and Terry and Mark and Kat have put together a great tool for us to keep those in mind and keep progress on those, but we're,
So I can see will get better.
did you want to say something, Terry?
No, I was just gonna say earlier on regard to the housing issues. There will be housing issues throughout the year that come up in terms of grants, and we can review those with Courtney and with you to ensure that any relevant grant opportunities are utilized to the fullest extent possible. And in terms of the grants that I don't have the document that you have in front of you here to review, but I'm not sure what you're looking at there, but we can certainly get estimates on when grant awards might happen to Courtney. In general, I would say it's probably about 3-ish months after the application date. Do you roughly agree with that, Mark?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
And some of the other kinds of funding opportunities like congressionally directed spending get tied up in other issues. And so that timeline can be.
That's very different, yeah. The congressionally directed funding, or what used to be known as earmarks, that's a long process and something that we could, we need to review what accounts are eligible next year, which is an unknown at this moment. But it is likely that we could do something, for example, around housing issues. And that process, we will want to start developing our list of projects for appropriations later this fall, and we'll need to apply for those in the winter, sometime probably in February or March, probably February. And then it's a long process. Those grants they're not grants, those directed funds are decided at different points along the way. between June of next year and the end of the calendar year. So what you applied for and what you received support on with regard to the airport is tied up in the current budget cycle, and those dollars, the federal government's budget year ends at the end of this month. However, they're not going to finish their work to accomplish a budget by then. So they're going to kick the can, and they'll get that done before the calendar year is our projection. And it'll take a few months after the president signs those appropriation bills for the dollars to flow to you. Assuming he signs the appropriation bills right before Christmas, which would be our current projection, you would probably receive those dollars in March-ish. But we would be watching them as soon as it passes through the White House, and it has to go through a variety of processes within the administration before it gets to you.
Thank you, Terry. Anything else on the federal priorities?
I think we can clean this up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Would you like to review it again next time, or
Yes.
is that, so we'll just pause on both?
Yes,
And get
please.
back together to before we forward these.
That'd be
Okay.
great.
So in terms of next time, ideally, if you're interested in sending council your recommended package with enough time, instead of trying to, add to the existing agenda, we would be meeting on the second Fridays, and we would be putting things on the council agenda on the fourth Mondays.
Great. That works. And we still have our existing policy priorities, so it's not like we don't have the amendments, but we have approved an existing set, so we're still fine.
So we're not meeting on next Friday, the 15th.
I don't believe we are.
No.
Good, because I have jury duty that day, so.
So
See how
that
long
would
that lasts.
That would put us on schedule for October 13th, and then the November 10 and December 8. And it feels as though the once a month cadence is effective enough until we get back into section.
For sure.
Okay, great.
All right. Anything else? Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, best of luck.